How to create your wedding guest list.
Hi, welcome back to Bride Society. I'm Rebecca, this is Laura, and as she said, today we are talking guest list. So tips and things to consider when it comes to creating the guest list for your wedding, because it can be tricky. Like, obviously, some people will be very obvious and come to you straight away, but there's a lot of sort of potentially political issues.
Budget is the other main factor when it comes to working out how many people you might be able to add to your guest list. So whether that's your overall kind of wedding budget or the price per person at the venue you've chosen will kind of have big implications on the number of people that you can afford to invite to your wedding.
So when it comes to the budget, it might be that family members are contributing to that budget. It's worth having a conversation when that money is getting involved as to the possible expectations that might come with that money in terms of what it's used for, perhaps. And that might also mean that your parents, if that's who's giving you the money, want an input about who's then going to be on the guest list. They may feel that that means that they've effectively like sort of paying for their side of the family to come, kind of thing. Like, so they might want your aunt twice removed son to come to your wedding. You might not. So yeah, it's definitely make sure you have that conversation early on. And also just in terms of also the budget amount, like, is that where that money is going?
And we've got a video about that topic, about kind of those expectations, also on our channel, so we'll link that if you want a bit more advice on how to broach the subject of not necessarily taking on board everybody's expectations. So when it comes to actually sitting down and start writing your list, where do you start? And that is with your must-have people. So this may be immediate family, it might be super close friends, but the people that you do not want to get married without. They are your top tier, essentially, people. So once you've got those, at least you've got a number you can start working with, and you might find you have the space to add some more people, or that might be it. That might be the people on your guest list.
Yeah. And so this next comment will slightly depend on which country you're watching from. So here in the UK, it's typical that we send out two different types of invitations. We send out an invitation to the whole day and invitations for the evening only. I know in North America it's much more common to you only send it for the whole day. So if you're in North America, this could be, you might wish to adopt a British model, or vice versa. But this really obviously is helpful when it comes to dealing with capacity issues and budget issues, because obviously if you're just inviting someone to the evening, that costs you less than providing for them for the whole day, because you're not providing that per plate issue. Now sometimes obviously, like, you might provide a small buffet evening food, so there is still kind of a level of cost per head sort of, but not nearly to the extent of obviously the full day. So it might be that if you can't afford to have all these kind of people that you want there for the full day, but you still really want them there, then it might be possible to kind of do this sort of, say, two-step thing.
Another way you could do it, if you don't want to go down the evening invitation route, or even if you do but still have maybe too many people on your list than you realistically can invite, you could create kind of your A-list or your top tier list of people, and you send their invitation out earlier. So send out the invitation, hopefully start getting some replies back, and if anybody then declines the invitation, you know that you can offer those spots to the kind of nice to haves, the second tier list that you would like there to celebrate with you, but ordinarily, budgetary wise, or for whatever reason, you might not be able to have them initially. So they get the invitation hopefully early enough that they don't think of themselves as a second thought. This is kind of the balancing act, which is why you send those other invitations kind of earlier than maybe some advice would suggest. To get the answer. But then, yes, then you can fill some of those slots with people that you do want there.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
It is tricky. So yeah, I guess those people kind of, they need to not know each other. Like, they need to not be the people that are likely to talk to one another about having received the invitation.
Yeah. And then there is the potentially minefield topic of a +1.
I feel like this is a big topic when it comes to guest lists.
Yes. Oh, definitely. So there is the expectation usually that if someone is married or in a long-term relationship, then they probably would expect to get a +1 if you invite them as a couple, essentially.
Yes, yeah. It's not that you would say to Jane +1. It's not a +1 in that sense. It's you're inviting the couple. Yeah.
Obviously, weddings can cost a lot of money, and if you have a friend who isn't in a relationship or isn't in that scenario where it's automatically that you'd probably expect to give them a +1, it can be difficult to decide whether or not you do give them a +1 or not.
Yeah, because it's difficult, because you also don't necessarily want your wedding photos full of people who you're like, who was that? I've never met.
Yes.
Plus the budget issue.
Yeah, there is a thing that you probably should know everybody who's at your wedding, or I like to think you would know everybody at your wedding. And this is where you might want to think about setting, like, if once you've made a decision about whether you are going to offer +1s or not to those kind of people, so not the couples who know both of them, so they're named, actually a +1 where that person can choose to bring whoever they want. Set a rule for everyone so it's fair.
This is actually sort of where I come down on it, is I tend to think if you're trying to avoid giving the +1 because of the budget issues and things, you know, I sort of have the opinion that if I go to a wedding, but I'm part of a group of people there, like a group of uni friends, like I know I'm going to know other people there fairly well, I don't necessarily feel like I would require a +1 because that's about giving that person some company, some sort of backup, a bit of someone to talk to through what's potentially a long day when, you know, in a room full of people you might not know. So I feel that if you want to, I say, create a rule and stick to it, but that rule could also be, if you wanted, that if that individual is going to know other people there, then they don't get a +1. Like, the group is the one kind of thing. But if someone genuinely is coming to your wedding and will know nobody there, or they've maybe met somebody once at something else, then maybe those people get to bring a +1 of choice. I think that's kind of a way around it that saves on the budget, but also doesn't leave anyone feeling kind of isolated or worried or all those kind of things. That's the rule I took.
Yeah, and I think I pretty much did that, I think. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're looking for a middle ground, that's the one we're offering.
You want everyone to enjoy themselves without you having to spend too much money on people you don't know.
Yes. Unless you have a great big budget and like, bigger the party the better, and obviously crack on. But yeah.
Now, another potentially contentious issue that you might face is whether or not you're choosing to have children at your wedding. And I mean, you might have strong feelings about this, so you know immediately whether you do want them or that you definitely don't want them at your wedding. And again, I think whatever decision you make is absolutely fine. Just make sure it is communicated very clearly on the invitation. Yeah. Because some people do not take a hint sometimes, and they might expect, oh, I'm being invited to the wedding, that means me and my 17 children can come along as well, and just expect seats for all of them. Not necessarily the case.
And of course, as well with that, you know, be prepared that if people can't bring their children, it might mean that logistically they just can't come. So it's also just factoring in, weighing up whether that is the scenario that you're okay with. So, like, in all honesty, in our wedding, particularly my husband would very much like to say no children. But there were people who we wanted there that we knew just wouldn't be able to come if they couldn't bring their children. So we did allow them. And one other rule that, again, middle ground rule, again, if you're trying to thread that needle, is, we are saying create one rule for everyone, but you could have family children only and then not beyond that. If you want to kind of keep it to a minimum, that could be one way of doing it. But equally, you might invite children and people don't want to bring them.
Well, yes, that's what happened to me. people were welcome, children were welcome, but everyone decided to leave them at home so they could have a night partying.
Yeah.
Now, if you are maybe one of the last of your like friendship group or social group to get married, you might have been invited to quite a lot of weddings previously. But you might not necessarily be as close to some of those people anymore if it was a little while ago. So you might feel some kind of obligation to like reciprocate that wedding invitation because you went to their wedding, but maybe it was like 7 years ago and now you don't really speak, but still there's that, I don't know if it's a self-imposed obligation, but I feel like everybody feels it somehow.
Yeah.
That you should also then invite them because of course they invited you to such an important day. I don't think you should feel obliged if you don't speak to them, or if you're not as close to them. And if you don't speak to them, definitely don't feel obliged. But if you're not quite as close, there is no obligation to reciprocate that invitation.
No. Because a middle ground to that, because I'm all about the middle ground today, is evening invitations. So again, you may want to be adopting the UK model if you're not in the UK. That's a great way to deal with those kind of level of guests where, like I said, you kind of want to be polite and invite them, but then even if they say yes, it's not like costing you as much, but it's still kind of involving them. And really, they know at 7 years down the line, like if they've also not spoken to you that much, that it would be weird to be invited to the whole day. Like they would feel that, but yeah, but it's still kind of an acknowledgement. So yeah, if you're just looking to kind of feel good about it, but without spending big, then that's one way to deal with it. And that also extends maybe in philosophy to work colleagues. Obviously, you may wish to separate your personal and private like entirely and not deal with work colleagues. If you're just inviting like one work colleague, then that's totally fine. I mean, obviously, anything you do is totally fine. People can deal with it, you know. But yeah, if you're just inviting one colleague, that kind of just says, I've got a close friend at work and they're coming to my wedding. And as soon as you start to invite sort of 3, 4, like in a small office, then you're then wandering into this politeness territory again, like the political stuff. So a way of dealing with that might be then to offer the invite to the group, but to the evening, like, or if you're in the US and evening invitations aren't a thing, just like casually saying, oh, but come along for a drink later on, kind of thing. I'd love to kind of celebrate and have a party with you, kind of thing. If you want it kind of relaxed, but they're included, but not in a super intimate way where you're saying your vows to the love of your life and you're like, yeah, we work together, that's a bit weird. Yeah.
So something that kind of goes a bit back to where we started at the beginning, talking about family expectations, if there's money involved, you also need to think about any cultural considerations. So there might be some cultures where you really do need to invite all the distant relations, otherwise it looks really badly not only on you as a couple but also your close family as well. So I mean, you'll be aware of this, I would think, and taken advice on this by your close relatives. But as much as again, your wedding is about the two of you, so you still can do whatever you want, how you want to have it, but it is just kind of respecting maybe some of those expectations. If you disagree with some of them, communicating those with the people it might affect, so everyone's on the same page so they can all get on board. But yeah, there are certain things that just maybe want to be aware of, that there might have been the assumption that you will be inviting certain people when actually they weren't even on your radar.
Then if you're having maybe a wedding abroad or somewhere a distance from home, or even if you're having like a weekday wedding rather than the usual sort of expected Saturday wedding, then you might want to consider sending out your invitations sort of early versus what's traditionally recommended, because this could end up affecting your guest list, because in those scenarios you're likely to get perhaps a few more declines, because obviously the cost for people who are travelling or the extra time that takes in terms of annual leave for work, or say for weekday weddings, just people not being able to get out of commitments and things like teachers, that kind of thing. So that might, I say, affect the guest list. And going back to this sort of tiered system about who you might be able to bump up or these kind of things. Yeah, so it's worth getting those invitations out a little bit earlier than normal.
And set a clear RSVP deadline. So whether you have actually a couple of different ones, if you are sending them out in the hopes that you might be able to add a few more people in later down the line, but whatever, even if it's just one deadline, set a firm deadline with buffer time, because people won't stick to that deadline. You will have to chase them, I'm afraid. But yeah, have that RSVP deadline so you know then your guest numbers, and that might not even be the case that then there's room to fill those gaps. It's just you know your numbers, you can give that to your venue, because your venue will need to know those numbers locked in probably a month before the wedding, because there will be catering implications and your final bill will be reliant on the number of guests you're having, or things like that. So yeah, strong, firm RSVP deadline.
Yeah, and because of that kind of lock-in sort of a month before, it does become at that point often then tricky to make changes after that. So if you, I don't know, start a new yoga class and you suddenly want to invite them all, it does become harder, particularly like obviously if it's the full day guests, where it's really stuff around the meal.
Yeah.
Sort of adding people to the evening slightly easier, so you're still paying per head, but is the venue really going to notice if you invite an extra person? Are those chips going to spread a little bit further? Probably going to be okay. Don't tell any venue I said that. But yeah, but it's obviously with the meal is once your seating plan's gone to the printers or whatever, and they've made meal choices, that kind of thing, it does become harder. So we're not saying don't do it, obviously do whatever you want, but it is going to be tricky and might incur extra charges, like with your venue, your caterers, to obviously like jig things around. But don't let that stop you. Just it's just being aware that it becomes harder. So yeah, try to get everyone in line before you hand the list over to the venue.
But I think overall, when you are thinking of doing your guest list and sitting down to do it, the main takeaway is to not feel pressure about who to invite. You shouldn't feel pressure to invite someone because of family expectations, because of family politics. The main people you need at your wedding are those that you want there to celebrate with you, the ones that matter to you as a couple. Everyone else, irrelevant. Just have there who you want there, and you'll have a wonderful day. Hopefully.
But it's like, we do want to acknowledge that that's kind of, it can be easier said than done. I'm saying like, don't feel like this, but like it's, so it's like, as Laura mentioned before, we do have another video on how to handle families, like, or other people's expectations when it comes to your wedding. So if you'd like actual straight out tips on how to deal with those scenarios, that is there, and we do have that linked in the description box below. But anyway, we hope you found some of these tips helpful for planning your guest list, that your headache is lessening. If you've got any other thoughts that you've found like really helpful whilst planning your list, do drop them in the comments below for other couples that might be watching. But otherwise, if you like the video, if you could give it a thumbs up, and of course don't forget to subscribe, because we're here every Friday with even more content.